Thank you for that. And we'll hand over to our last speaker, Liz, one of our steering group members from Yorkshire Housing. Take us through decent homes. Thanks, Liz.
Afternoon, everybody. I am really the graveyard shift, and I have got no interaction whatsoever, so it'll be dead boring. But first of all, just to introduce myself, Liz O'Connor. I'm Director of Homes for Yorkshire Housing, and also on this fantastic steering group with my lovely colleagues here. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the relaunch, or should we say, hang on, let me click, sorry. Or the non-relaunch of the Decent Homes Standard. So the government is aiming to have the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030. For anybody who's worked in housing for a long time will know that Decent Homes has not been updated since 2006. So if anybody worked there at that time, we know that we had many contractors working on his properties to bring us kitchens and bathrooms up to standard. And if, you know, I'm referring to Believe Housing there, you're going into them properties now, them kitchens have expired, and something needs to be really done to look at what we can do next. So the government identified this in their Levelling Up white paper, and looked at what, you know, we're going to introduce a decent homes review. That were in 2021, we're at the beginning of 24, and we've still not seen anything. Although there's lots of noise come from around part 1 of the Decent Homes Review, review from autumn 2021, and right to last, I've even put winter there because we're still in it, that, aren't we? Are we? Still? Yes. So from to now, we've not heard anything from the government around what the Decent Homes Review is. So I've done a lot of digging around this to see where can we go. So following Grenfell, there was national recognition that our homes need to improve. And then we had the death of our Bishak, which resulted in damp and mould, compounding this even further on the works that we need to do in our properties. We do, however, have the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, but that's really, really loose. It's a reasonable state of repair, reasonable modern facilities, and a reasonable degree of thermal comfort. So it doesn't really give much more detail around what's required in them properties. As I said, in 2021, the Levelling Up white paper made reference to a number of non-decent homes that we have, and along with the building safety legislation, it set out some clear expectations of us as landlords, but not actually any detail. So the phase 2 that came about in spring 22 was for us to understand that the standard isn't right, and went out to us as a sector to ask us what we wanted and what we wanted to do to change. And a lot of the feedback that came back was actually the standard's broadly acceptable for what we were doing at that point in time. And then phase 2 came out and included the private rented sector and looked at potential regulatory changes to that standard as well. But we've still got no current specific details. What we do have now, though, and I think many of you in this room have been consulted around the AWAB's law and the next stage for that, and looking at time limits to repair them hazards within properties that are focused on damp and mould and other hazards as well. There's a new competence and conduct standard that's going to be introduced for the social housing sector, and there's also the minimum energy efficiency standards that we're now looking at. And I think if anybody currently is in a role that's within our sector, you'll know that there's so much consultation coming out from the government that we've got to put responses to, and that's feeding back into what will be a regulatory oversight. They're also going to be publishing new changes to electrical safety standard and the consultation response around our tenants' rights to complain as well. Not to complain, to complaints. They can complain, and I think they do, but maybe not as much as we want them to. So why do we need to do it? We could say that the HH SRS standard is okay. So why do we need to review that? And do we agree that things do need to change around our property standards? Currently, according to the NHF, 14% of our homes, our social housing, is non-decent, and that's within England. And 23% of private rented homes have no modern facilities, no effective insulation or heating, and they're in a state of disrepair. And the NatFeds welcome these changes. They need to reflect our current conditions that are needed for decency within our properties. And as I've put there, meaningful standard needed so our customers can live in a safe home with modern facilities that meets their expectations. And there's evidence around households in private rented sector that they're more likely to live in poor quality social housing than somebody who lives in social housing, poor quality housing in private rented as opposed to social housing. And it was found that the majority of non-decent homes are lived in by somebody who is over 55. So have we put enough investment within our properties and our vulnerable customers who are living in them properties? And one finding is that damp were less prevalent in some of these properties that were in poor condition. And the NHF reported that only following the Our Bishop outcome, when we all had to put our returns in, it came back that only 4% of homes were failing the decent home standard had damp, but it's still a key priority within our sector. And energy efficiency, we need to be changing to protect the environment, keep our homes healthy, but we know that that's going to come as a cost to the sector. We talked about air source heat pumps, and I think if anybody's installed one, we all know the cost it is to put one of those in. But this standard for 2006 is now becoming outdated because of energy efficient measures and these new standards that we need to be reflecting on. So although we've had no details, there's lots of rumours going around of what's expected in the new decent home standard. A lot around updates on the condition of our building components, and that will include roofing and walls. There's an introduction of the new energy efficiency standard and the new DMC standard focused around Awab's law. There's even talk of including flooring within properties as well as a standard. So how should we prepare as a sector? So if we're looking at bringing our homes up to EPC standard by 2030, we know that that is already a requirement, and I think a lot of landlords are working towards doing that, particularly when your property is void. Onto decent homes as well, it must be that we're available to heat 2 rooms within the house. Landlords need to ensure that that property is warm enough. That's the only standard under HHSRS. But we're implementing now new heating to look at an opportunity to increase that energy efficiency within the homes and install it to correct levels. We know that there's a consultation ongoing around Awab's law and timescales taken. So what can we do to prepare for this? We need to be checking our homes now, looking at that we've carried out our stock condition surveys and they're up to date. I think I've heard this word so many times as well today, checking our data, making sure it's accurate and cleansed. But most of all, empowering our colleagues to make them decisions around what would they accept in that property. And one of our sayings at Yorkshire Housing, would you accept the standard you walk by? And it's looking at taking account of DMC and the wider conditions that impact on that, and knowing our homes as part of the Better Social Housing Review. But whatever we do, it's got to be practical and workable and come at the right cost for us as well, and make sure that we're setting that right standard for keeping our homes safe. So at Yorkshire Housing, we've started we're well into our programme of stock condition surveys. I wrote this in November and I said we'd done 7,000. We've now increased that. But only a small percentage of our stock condition surveys are actually coming back with damp and mould issues. We've started a full data cleanse of our data, particularly around repairs. A lot of our data were coming back and it's not giving us an accurate picture of what's in our repairs. So we are now looking at cancelled jobs, duplicate jobs, etc. to give us that right picture. We're moving on to a new CRM system. I say that very loosely because it keeps getting delayed. It's one that begins with S and ends in E, and hopefully it's going to solve the world. We've done a lot around colleague training and awareness, particularly in how to deal with customers and customer service, but more predominantly within our team around damp and mould and making sure they're equipped and they've got the right equipment to diagnose them problems and be able to resolve them. And we're carrying out works when properties are empty to support EPCC. That has an impact because it means we've got longer turnaround times, and often as well we're putting more costs into them properties. And looking at how we can engage with the silent customer. I think somebody mentioned this earlier. So it's them customers who aren't reporting jobs, who are not on our radar. So it's picking them customers up and being able to see what's going on in their properties as well. And one thing that I've just added that's not on this slide is around particularly us listening to the customer more. And we had an audience a few weeks ago with Quasio. Does everybody know Quasio? He actually came into our offices and he's done a podcast with our chief exec. But it was really, really insightful to hear what he had to say about his activism around social housing and campaigning for better standards in properties. And I think we might have to ask him along here one day, Ross. So all this, you know, we don't suddenly have extra money in our budgets to carry out all any additional works. We all know how we forecast based on what we've spent the year before. So how can we actually fund this? You know, we say in Awab's law, the consultation process is actually saying, you know, you can do all this work and it shouldn't cost you any more money. But we all know that it does come with a cost. So we need to look at how financially viable our homes are and look at that imbalance between the income we get and what they're actually costing us. Decent homes will come at a cost, and it's going to be increased pressure to maintain that standard within them properties. But our stock value doesn't increase at the same time. As I said before, there's a lot of reform happening all at once. And what are the impacts of all that on our time and our cost, our resource? We've got building safety, consumer standards, rent cap, inflation rises. How can we make sure that we reflect that within our budgets? The government shared no estimates of how much the upgrades to properties are going to cost or what actually is needed, but they're expressing that most landlords can meet this cost within their own budgets, as the standard is about safety, and safety doesn't cost, apparently. But a cost cap may be implemented, and that'll be something that the government will have to give us if we need to carry out these works. I recall when we first went in Decent Homes, and we're like, where do you get that money from to do all that work? And we all know that we had big loans and business plans over the next few years. Is that something that we'll have to do again? And what funding is going to be available for those hard-to-treat homes, so those properties that we know we've got in our stock that are not the ones that we really want? What do we do? Do we sell them off? Do we start looking at much more around disposals? And what can we learn from other organisations who are already strengthening their journey on compliance? It's much more about focusing on the home and not the property. Having an updated list of items that are in reasonable repair and that are already meeting them modern expectations. And looking at where we can have them current challenges around those eco measures. But the key thing is that it's so important that we all know our properties, we all know our stock, and we've got that data to back up what's going on in our properties or homes. And what challenges do remain and how should we address them? So our homes, as I said, need to be a meaningful modern standard. We need to be looking at our older homes that are not going to meet decency standards and what we do with them as a viable option. We need to ensure that our customers have got access to affordable, decent housing in a period where we're going through economic uncertainty. We know that impacts on our customers' standard of living, so we need to provide them with a well, affordable, safe, maintained home. And lastly, whatever we do, we just need to be prepared for this so that we can see the future for our own properties, but most of all give our customers a decent home to live in and make these changes in our properties through the eye of the customer. Any questions? You all want to go home, don't you?
Liz, were you looking for us to maybe discuss this in the groups or not?
Yes.
You'd like some feedback?
I think that's what we're going to do.
I think that's what my understanding was, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you would like all to discuss that in your groups on what your journey is and what are your expectations of the Decent Homes Review, and if there are major changes, how would you actually implement them from a resource and a budget point of view?
Okay, should we have 15 minutes and then we'll try and get away early? Is that okay with feedback? Yeah? Thanks, Liz. Appreciate that.
Have you got a good natter there? Good. Any questions or anything that anybody wants to raise about that? God. Lee.
What did you agree on yourself?
Like you touched on there, 2006 we had this big boom, didn't we, where we did decent homes. I think I was just starting out really as an apprentice, and I remember working.
You don't have to you don't have to bring that one up.
But do you almost feel that, obviously, once we're up to a standard, that the focus on capital works, kitchens, bathrooms, re-roofs, has almost got lost in the repairs and voids? I mean, it's no criticism, but like Believe Housing, they haven't touched on what they're doing with the capital side. And when I feel at the minute sector, it's just repairs and voids. And even in my company, Platform Housing Group, we sit in meetings, and repairs and voids is the first one, and I'm always the last to deliver it, and I'm always going to probably a shorter slot. And then what we found is we were a similar position to Believe Housing, where we had over a stock of 48,000. I think we had something like 500 voids that were rolled in. So what happened is they came to me, and I had to spend my capital section to give all them to voids because they were a priority rather than kitchens and bathrooms. Do you feel as a sector that's what you're almost...
Yeah, and it's funny, we were just saying, I said, when I sit, we go to our joint exec director meetings and we focus on budget, and guess which budget we always focus on? Repairs. Oh, you're overspent. No, we're under budgeted. But what budget do we never actually focus on? Our capital spend, it's like, we don't mention it. It's as if it doesn't exist. It just happens. And we were saying about connection with your asset management teams. Are we working closely enough? And I don't think we are. We've not got that detail and that data to support each other. And I think that's where, we do need to get a lot better at being able to work much more closely. I work really closely with the director, but from a team point of view, I think we've got to get much better connectivity. And I think we talked about that on our table, that, your capital spend is often just sidelined because your repairs is always kind of the key focus. And, we go to board meetings, what are they going to talk about? Repair spend, capital spend don't get mentioned.
There is something out of that, though, Lee, and if you think about 2015 when we had the rent cut, and people in this room remember we took millions. I mean, the business I was with took £55 million out, to balance the books. So you would have seen a reduction in capital investment around 2015, maybe to 2018, 19. You've only just seen it coming back. And Inside Housing did run articles the last couple of years. You start to see that massive increase. And it's not by chance or opportunity. It's just the fact that it's reality. We've had to start going again. Don't you, the biggest budgets in an RP and a local authority will be capital, repairs and staffing. And I think one of the things I got challenged once about is a chief exec challenged me to said, your unit cost for delivering capital is too expensive. And I said, no, it's not. I said, what's it? The trouble with my unit cost is you're overlaying too many overheads from the centre that's making me more expensive. So when you've done the same kind of analysis on that as I've done on in terms of delivery, then I think we're on the level playing field. And I think there's lots of smoke and mirrors going on personally. I mean, I made a point around all that about it's not going to get any easier, it's an oh shit Sherlock moment, but it's not. There's going to be greater scrutiny coming on us, and we talk about efficiency with the Believe guys this morning. I think it's going to come even thicker and faster, if I'm being honest with you. And somewhere there's got to be a give, and I think the give will be around staffing. I think that we're not going to be able to carry the overheads we're carrying now. Somebody mentioned years ago when we're making efficiencies saying, having these days where people have their face painted is offering no value whatsoever, so why are we even doing stuff like that? That's all going to come to bear whether we like it or not, because we can only stretch so far, can't we? We've got to be realistic about what it is. But you will always find, working in the capital world, and I know from my own personal experience, is that it's one of the budgets they're going to go for, and you'll get it cut, and everyone will expect you to deliver the same amount of units with less money. There's the trick, I guess, at the end of the day.
Well, you're right there, because we work for a CSV partner as well, and I'm sat in meetings at the minute, and they're saying to me, we can go to the external contractor now and get a kitchen place for £5,000. I'm saying to them, well, go and get that kitchen if you want, see what that product is at the end, and we're averaging around about a minute 8,000. That includes flooring, painting, full kitchen replacement as well. But let's say, because we are internalised and all my workforce is 100% self-delivery from a DLO, we we do have them challenges, and we do exactly like you said there, Russell, we get hit with, you're too expensive, too this, and we're always on that borderline, we'll just cancel the order, we'll just sub it out. But I see that across the sector, the capital side a lot is subcontracted out, and there's not that big push to actually internalise them. And that section of work, that's right for you.
Yeah, well, we've literally just done that. We have moved all our planned investment internal onto day-to-day repairs and empty homes. We were migrating away from Equans, so it came at a natural time for us to move that resource, and it saved us recruiting, and we know how hard recruitment is, so sorry, Jen. But it's, you know, it's supported it. I would like to say that they're all really smiling and happy as they've skipped away from fitting the bathrooms to working on voids, but it's been a need, and now we're 100% carrying out all as planned investment work with contractors. And I think a lot are moving away, you know, don't you worry though. Any more questions?
Anybody else?
Right, Russ, I'll hand over to
Just
you.
one more figure, just one thing I did want to raise. The data thing comes on. I was talking to Paul Isherwood, who we've been back many, many years and talking about data, and we've been reading the press over the last 4 or 5, we must collect stock condition data. It's another no-shit Sherlock moment. We've been collecting data for the last, God knows, 30, 35 years. It's been part of day-to-day asset management. To read in the press that people are saying we need to collect data, it's just a ridiculous statement, because we should have always been doing that. And if we're saying openly in the press, and I think the secretary is saying we need to collect data, I wonder what the regulator's thinking, reading you know, highlights about and headlines saying we need to collect data. They're not daft, these guys in the background. They know exactly what your organisation's doing, yeah, and that pressure will come to bear. I'm being honest with you, they know exactly what's going on. They get all your returns. Gold goes in the sausage machine. They know where all the risk is within the sector, and they'll be waiting on that. So anybody that's got any issues that are floating underneath the surface around data, around the performance, around compliance and the rest, I suggest you put some focus into that. I know it's an obvious one again, but put some focus in, because the regulator will know exactly what's happening in your organisation. Don't kid yourselves, they will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, well done, Liz.